wanted to briefly address this issue of being as it pertains to the existence of God. I want to start from what we call first principles. And the first of the first principles of logic is the self-evident and undeniable principle of being. That is, being is. Along with that, being is intelligible, and being is that principle which constitutes all formal, primary, and adequate means by which we can come to that which we call common sense. As we consider being, we start with the self-evident principle that I am, not in the uppercase sense of the I am of Exodus 3:14 and 15, but as it's been said, the little I am, all existent being, inexorably leads to the notion of necessary being, the I am of Exodus 3:14, or as the Septuagint translates it, ego eimi o on, I am the existing one, God being the very ground of all existence. So when we look at the nature of being in an abstract sense, and then from divine simplicity, we know that there must be a thing or a someone that is this ground of being, what we might say, esse per se subsistens, that is, being or existence essentially existing in and of itself. We call this term aseity as it relates to God. But as we make a metaphysical analysis of what being is, it first of all tells us that being as such is unlimited and simple. That is, anything can share or participate in this notion of being or existence an infinite amount of times. There is no limit to existence in the sense that it can't be exhausted. It was John of Damascus that spoke of God as this great, infinite sea of existence or being. And we know that this is a self-evident metaphysical principle that being is. Just to analyze the nature of reality, we can see that all things share in what we call this phenomenon of to be. Shakespeare said, to be or not to be, that is the question, and it is indeed the question. Being is, which is self-evident. The predicate and subject can collapse into the same notion. I exist. I'm saying that Kenny is. Although I don't have my being essentially, I do have it accidentally, and therefore I know that ultimately I do not receive my being from another being that has to look to something else, and this causal chain cannot infinitely regress to an infinite amount of contingent beings, but it must begin or it must end, whichever direction you're going, it must end in that which is ipsum esse subsistens, being itself subsisting. And so being as we contemplate it, is by itself, no qualifications. It is unlimited. Being also covers all things and all perfections, whether they be actual or possible. That is, everything that is, all perfections, all qualities are in this sense of being, this ground of being, or those perfections could not be instantiated. We also know that being as such is infinite because it can be participated in or instantiated in an infinite number of ways, an infinite number of possibilities, and that is conceptually or potentially. And since being, absolutely speaking, is unlimited, remember I am dealing with the term being and existence, using it synonymously, but actually being is that which is and what that thing that exists is. There's actually a distinction between essence and being, which make up existent being or contingent being, but with ipsum esse subsistens, with being itself subsisting, there is an identity of essence and existence, necessarily, I may add. And as we consider this notion of being, it must be caused. Any finite being must be caused. That means it must be participated, or any finite being that is must participate in this unlimited being, this infinite being. And to speak of causation, we speak of the issue of being limited, that is, cutting off a part of being, so to speak, and participating in it. For example, when I cut off a gallon jug and define that as a gallon jug, I'm limiting being and therefore causing something to come into existence, because being itself is infinite. We might say also another way to limit that which is to carve a bronze sculpture in the sense of making the statue of David by negation. I'm chopping off or cutting off this pieces of this bronze slab in order to bring this statue of David into existence. We might also add to this that something must have made it this particular being rather than something else. And when we define what something is, we find the species by looking at genus and difference. And so to add a difference there is to cause something to come into existence and a particular something to come into existence. So to limit things is to cause them. And since there is a way that a particular thing could exist without that particular limitation, that makes it be this particular thing rather than something else. And so all limited being therefore requires causation, because those limited things cannot exist without being made the limit kind of thing that they are. And that answers the issue of why something is. It must be caused. And it must be caused by that which is being of itself subsisting. When we consider existent being, we also should add that existent being does not exist of itself, and therefore it has to look to this infinite sea of being, which this participation is a limitation in that greater ocean of being. And this limited being itself does not have its existence in and of itself. And so there must be a reason for this non-being to step out of nothingness into existence. And that can only come from a causal agent. Now, to look at the other side of being in the sense of this infinite, unqualified being that has all perfections, we should say that since God cannot be caused, infinite existence cannot share or participate in existence, that God cannot be limited by any kind of finite being. And so God must be pure being or pure act, what we call pure actuality. God being pure form, pure existence, existence itself subsisting. It must be this way. Energy cannot account for all that is, even if energy was eternal. First of all, energy is composed of what it is and that it is. There is nothing within energy in and of itself that would suggest that it is a necessarily existing being. It doesn't have existence in and of itself. It is itself a limitation. It doesn't have the perfections of any kind of form. It doesn't have the perfections of what necessarily comes with the composition of time and space for this energy to exist in. And anything that is composite must be composed by one who is not composed himself or itself. And so God possesses the fullness of being without limitation, and thus embraces all perfections to an infinite degree. And we're not talking about a quantitative infinite, which energy would necessarily have to be a quantitative infinite, but we're talking about a qualitative infinite. So in conclusion, we are saying that God, what everybody understands to be God as proficiently defined, he must be simple. He must be pure act. He cannot be an admixture of any kind of potentiality for any perfection or any kind of existence. But God is all isness without any able to be-ness, so to speak. And so God is all being without any becoming whatsoever. And this all understand to be God.